Here we are going to go over the function and tests of the Desktop Max and desktop proximity switches. This is for the newer desktop models using the magnetic proximity switches. To start, we are covering the ShopBot software settings. For Desktop Max, input 3 is the input that all of our proximity switches are hooked up to. We can check the setting for these switches by going to our ShopBot software in the command console under Values and Input-Output Switch Modes. Now we want to pay particular attention to input switch number 3, which should be 1 normally open limit. While the proximity switches are not triggered and are functioning, input 3 should be dark green. The background color will change based on whether the switch is triggered or not triggered. Now, to cover the electrical wiring of these proximity switches, we first want to remove the electronics enclosure, the backing plate for this enclosure. The plate for this enclosure is blue and is affixed by 6 screws, 2 of them on each side into the aluminum plate and 2 of them along the edge. Covering the wiring itself, each proximity switch wires into one of the input terminals. They all wire into input 3. We can see these terminals here down at the bottom right of the control board. We can see the inputs labeled with IP1, IP2, and IP3. Also in this terminal block are ground and plus 5 volts. Each of our proximity switches uses a 2-wire conductor. Each of these conductors is labeled with a colored wire. The 2-wire conductor have the wire colors of brown and white. The X proximity switch is labeled with a red, the Y with a blue, and the Z with a white heat shrink. The most easily identifiable proximity switches are the Y and Z proximity. Here we are looking at the Z switch. Now the Z switch comes through the back of the YZ car, and we can trigger it by putting our magnet right in front of the switch. While the magnet's in front of the switch, we will see input 3 light up light green in the control software. We can trigger it on and off very easily by moving the magnet. The Y proximity switch is probably the second most difficult to identify behind the X. If we look at this aluminum plate that our anti-backlash nut for the motor attaches to, we can see a little silver nub. Through that nub is a little hole, and we should be able to see the black proximity switch wire and the proximity switch itself on that nub. You can see me pointing to it here. Now if we position our magnet at the back of this nub, or on the side of the nub, we can trigger that magnetic switch. Here we'll just show it being triggered. Adjusting the magnet, and we get it triggered on input 3. Now identifying the X proximity switch is probably the most difficult. First, we want to remove the upper of the blue plate that goes along the side of your tool that's on the same side as the frequency drive. Here we have both of them removed for ease of access. Now identify your VFD, and at the bottom of the VFD and the plate that holds it will identify the other aluminum plate. Now, first we want to see if we can identify the black proximity switch cable with the connector on it for the X. That will help us find where that wire is going through in the plate. Here we're just trying to get a good view of where that wire goes through that plate for you. You'll see me pull on the wire here, and you can see where it comes up and through the plate. Now this presents an issue for testing them, as to test the switch we need to get a magnet up there to trigger it. Now it is possible to do it with a magnet on a stick like we are doing here, but it's also difficult to lose the magnet there on that aluminum plate. So the best way to test the X switch really is to test the Y and the Z first and ensure that they're functioning, and then test the X normally just by triggering it on the magnets of the tool.